Okay, welcome everyone. So today my project is on how to create a new list. It's sort of the big thing about Vote Builder in general is your ability to create a list, to really search by certain filters and pin down who you want to talk to and how you want to address what concerns you want to address, who you've talked to before. And so today the training I really want to do is just sort of go over the features that are provided by Vote Builder, and sort of go over it in the My Voter side, and then really briefly in the My Campaign side. So I really want to address these in a little bit in detail. So I think I want to make this a two-part thing about how to create a list, because there are certain things that do get confusing after a while. But the idea is here is that we can go over them together. And so if you have any questions, or if you have any chats, please go ahead and put those down, and we'll try to address them as we go on. But in the meantime, I'm just going to go ahead and go forward with the presentation. So I'll start with the My Voters side, and we'll look at how to create a new list. When we create a new list, your very first thing that you'll see is when you're opening it up, you'll see that you have some certain defaults. So you were looking for only registered active voters, and you have a few suppressions turned on. So if you're really trying to target the right people, you want to make sure that they have a good address, you have the best cell phone available, and you're not talking to deceased people, right? So that's automatically done for you. But if you want to turn it on, you can do that too, and I'll show you how to do that. I'll show you how to do that later. So what I want to do first is I want to look at sort of go down in order of what the search criteria is. At first, if you're looking at making a list very often, sometimes you have certain things you want to make as favorites, certain things that you look at more often than not. For me, when I'm creating lists, very often I look at location. I look at things like scores, things like Canvas status. That's for you to do later on if you're making lists as you're working with us. That's just that's something you can do just by clicking the star to the right of the section. The first thing we could do is activist code, just because we're going in alphabetical order. And activist code is a way to find people who are part of a certain constituency or some way that they've been targeted as they've answered a question that it was wise for them to say either yes or people didn't mark no to it, right? So a lot of times you might have activist codes, like we're talking to people who are lawyers. They might have a lawyer activist code. And I'm just going to click on it so you can see what we're talking about here. Again, if you click on the blue, that's where you pull out all the possible options you can choose from. So you can click on multiple of them, right? You see you have some constituencies, you have certain donors, you have, not everyone's going to see this, but people who have talked about what's most important to me is jobs and or economy, or healthcare, or gaming, right? So if you're making a list about, I want to talk to people who are very environmentally involved, they're going to be voters that vote based on their environmental stance, you can just click that, or maybe energy and environment as well, click that. And if you do that and you go down to your save, you'll be able to make a list just solely based on active voters who are involved in these two things, right? You could check all, uncheck all, whatever it is. Okay, and it's also broken down into what kind of thing it is. You have elected officials, party officials, invisibility, so certain things like yard signs or local union, whatever it may be. Okay, so that's just the very first thing. Then going into address types again alphabetically. See if I have to reload here and see if it'll work now. Address types. So these are really good for, especially when you're creating your walk lists. They're important because you really want to make sure you target the right people. If you're creating a walk list for volunteers, or if you're going door to door, you want to make this as convenient as we can. And so that's going to bring me to my first question for you all to think about. And I know Anna has sent out some emails to you about these questions, but also those of you watching in the future. Some things to think about is when you're making your walk list, address type is very important to you, right? Because when you're looking at, you can do things like walkable houses, right? Which means probably single family homes, those that have been marked as a way to get to the front door without any things in the way, right? So they're not houses that have that are inaccessible, that can't be found, or they might not be apartment buildings. So you might also want to look at things like in-state mailing addresses only. Usually that is done for you anyway. These usually are people whose address is in town because you just selected the local location, just in case you can do that. And also buildings with units, right? So you can select however many units you can go from. You can check that and say, I only want apartment buildings, maybe those with 20 units or more in them, right? As a sign that's probably going to be an apartment building. Okay. And so that might be something for you to think about of what's important to me when I create a walking list for volunteers or for myself as a way to canvass the neighborhood. As we go into addresses, these are good for people who have, especially if they've moved recently. You can see that you can check for the new address, right? So for added sense, you could check for people who've, if you know someone who's moved, you can check if they've moved in the last year. Check a date, and you'll see that from this year on, they've added a new address, that you have a new address going for them. Um, Let's see things like type, which is either voting or mailing. More likely than not, where they live is going to be their voting address. But if sometimes they might register a PO box for their mailing address, you want to go ahead and just check that. So it depends on what if you're making a walking list or a calling list or a mailing list. But a lot of times people might have the same thing for both. So it might not necessarily be important to you, but just in case, to make your list as accurate as you want to make sure you have the right checkbox selected. And source is very often not really important for most people. These are for just advanced users. It's just a way to check where they get the addresses from. Make sure they're as accurate as they can be. Another important one for me is, and this is going to lead into my next question, is we're going to talk about the age and registration date. Especially when you're going into your get out the vote effort, you're really trying to narrow down who you want to talk to and what's going to be important to them. A big thing to do is look at age, right? And so you have your age box, age from and to. If you always pick the first box, you go 60, and then if you don't put anything in the second box, it just goes to infinity. But you can also go from 60 to 61 if you really want to be precise about it. But really, this is your choice. Remember, you have active voters, so again, you generally want to start at 18, right? Because they'll be active. Okay. You also have the birthday from, date of birth from. So we look at age, or we know we have some county chairs who have taken the initiative and looked at doing birthdays, right? So they've talked about, how about we send a letter to those who have an April birthday? So they'll be able to choose what month and go from April to May. Doesn't matter the year, right? They'll be able to select that and be able to send a mailing out to those who have birthdays in April. So it's another really good way to really target your list again. And then you have your zodiac sign, which I'm not. If you want to choose that from, you can as well. But also down here, you have your registration date from. In Kentucky, when people move, they have to re-register at their motor vehicle or wherever they go to register. And so sometimes you'll be able to look at their oldest known and see where they registered at before. Or if you want to make sure they have the current registration, you can also check current. So you want to check it from someone who's registered in the last year and make sure they're at the current address, or make sure that registration is current. You can also check that as well. Okay. Going on, applicant status is something that we usually don't worry about. I almost never click it, but it's just sort of really more particular. This is sort of for advanced users, and you want to make sure that if you're matching up from an Excel file, you'll be able to look at only your active voters. But a big thing that we do that I do use a lot, and this is one that often trips people up, is Canvas status. So I'll kind of spend a little bit more time on this and really go into what it involves. So with Canvas status, you have two options. You can include people or you can exclude people based on the following Canvas results. So if I'm creating a list and I want to talk to people who are between the ages of 35 and 50, but I don't want to talk to these certain people, right? And I'll talk about the reasons why. When I click exclude right away, it gives you some certain options that are clicked for you right away, right? It's excluding people that were Canvas. Canvas just means that someone has talked to them. And you have deceased, you have disconnected, you have inaccessible down here. But again, these might not necessarily be what you need to choose from, right? So if you're talking about doing a walking list, you're going to canvas neighborhood by foot. Does it really matter if the phone's disconnected? Not really, right? So you can go ahead and uncheck that. You don't need to exclude those people. Same thing goes for inaccessible. If the house is inaccessible, but they have a good phone number, you can unclick that as well. For phone calls, if you're doing left messages, you want to exclude those, you can. If not, there's no necessity. You can call them back, no problem. Uncheck that again. Again, moves is another good thing. A lot of people have cell phones registered, so it doesn't really matter where their mailing address is. As long as you have your cell phone, you can make sure you can call them and talk to them. Non-citizens, definitely a good one to keep check, just because they're not going to be registered active voters. Other language and Spanish are also good ones to make sure you can exclude, just to make it easier especially if you're sending out volunteers, just to make them sort of have a more pleasant experience, as well as refuse. But that's sort of a campaign issue. These are people who have been marked as refused when they talk to a canvasser. But that might be just because they're having a bad day. Doesn't mean you don't want to call them again. So again, this is you can check in. And the same thing goes with wrong number. It depends on how you're planning on approaching these people. Okay, and the same thing goes for you can only include only. So if you want to call people back who you left a message to and follow up, you can go ahead and do that. But as you notice, when you do include only, everything is left blank for you. So you're really choosing based on what you want to have in your list. So if you really want to talk to, let's say you have Spanish volunteers, here's a good chance for you to talk to people who only speak Spanish, right? So it's another great way for you to narrow down your list and make it, make it as precise as you want it to be. Okay. So we have things like campaigns, input types, contact types. Campaign and input type, generally I leave blank. It's usually not important. But as we develop, we might use it. But, that's going to be a training for later. But the big thing might be contact type, right? If you want to include only people that you've talked to while walking, you can do that, right? So you can do contact type walk, and they were canvassed. To follow up, you can do that as well. So you can include both things in this one section under canvas status, right? Or if you want to do, did they finish the web survey? They talked to on an auto dialer. The bulk mail was sent to them. Things like that. A phone call was done as well. So you have that, and you can do passes as well. So if people mark down what pass it was, you could do, especially when you get closer to the get out the vote effort, you can have for your first pass going through these people, second pass, etc. Later on, you have canvas by. That's just a good way if you have a lot of canvassers working for you on a campaign or volunteers. You can address who they canvassed by, so it gives you a record of who talked to them. So if you really want to be even more specific about, hey, it was me talking to them, I can go ahead and search my name, and if I was added, it should be able to find me, and there I am. So it knows that that I could follow up with them. So if I click myself and I did my list, I could talk to people that I canvassed by walking, and it was me. And even I could go even further on. I could narrow it down by date, and I want to talk to them from April 1st until now. I can leave that blank. So it gives me a lot of options here. Or if I don't want to do that, and I don't remember what date exactly I talked to them, I can do canvas, but in the past, 90 days, 60 days, whatever it may be. So there's really a lot of options here when you're going to canvas status to really narrow down your list, especially when you get busier and you're really trying to target voters. It's very easy to forget who you've talked to, who you haven't. So that's why it's very important to really track who you've talked to, enter it back into the system. So that way, when you're going through and looking at it, 60 in the past 60 days or whatever it may be, I would find it impossible to remember who I talked to without having it in the system. So it's a good way to keep track of it this way. Um, in Kentucky, we really don't have the early voting, so that's something we can go ahead and skip. Emails are those for people who send out emails. That's a paid service through Vote Builder. But generally, most people will not really touch that. Okay. And then we're just going to go ahead and go through just a few quick things that most people don't really talk about much, but household party counts. So if you want to talk to people, or if you want to avoid talking to people who have a lot of Republicans in the House, if they have 3 to 5 Republicans in the House, that's when your list is going to include those people. And we'll talk about excludes and narrows and adding later on. But it's just an option that you have, is that if you have a House full of Republicans, it might not be worth your time to go send out your volunteers out there. But it's another option we have. Same thing goes for household sex counts. You can do however many men, however many women, and however many people in all. And you also going into the likely things. The DNC, who provides the information that gets inputted back into Vote Builder, they base a lot of their modeling on certain things like like name, like registration status, zip code, to identify ethnic subgroups, likely ethnicities, and likely religion. So again, these aren't with certainty, but if you can see with high certainty, you'll see what kind of group they're generally going to belong to. Of course, they'll have some exceptions, and that's why I call it likely. So I think for today, I'm just going to go ahead and stop it here, just because there's a little bit to process. So I want to go ahead and talk about just the 3 questions one more time that we've been talking about. Talking about how you can use age to really narrow down your list of who you want to talk to, and why it might be important to talk about doing just a list of voters that are 65 or older. Or you may be doing the voters from, let's say, 18 to 22, and how that's important to use and to really address your list that way. Also, we could talk about we could also talk about what kind of address types we have, and how you want to target people in that sense too. What's better for your volunteers, or when it's important to use it and when it's not. And just in all, also talking about how you can use include or exclude, especially in the Canvas status, to really make your list more precise. So as you go on, we can include comments down below this video. Just want to make sure it's as interactive as we can, especially as we get closer into election season. I want to make sure everyone's just as trained and is very comfortable with using Vote Builder. So again, thank you all for your time, and you'll be hearing from us soon about continuing on into creating a list a little bit more, and also adding new steps into the process, and really make your list as precise as it gets. Okay, so thanks a lot for your time. Bye-bye.